With me now, the Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers. Let's start with the broader economic outlook this week. The government talking up our comeback. Hard to disagree, really, when you see that growth for the September quarter.
Oh, look, we welcomed the September GDP number. It was a relatively strong number, but it wasn't a surprising outcome, given that's when most of the country eased restrictions and given it's measured against what was a horrific quarter the quarter before in June. It hasn't yet made up the ground lost this year. It hasn't undone the damage done. And what we've said about it is we want the recovery to be strong. We want it to be broad and enduring. We want people to get ahead in the recovery. But we also want to make sure people aren't left behind. There's still 1 million unemployed, 1.4 million looking for more hours at work. Workers over 35 excluded from the government's hiring subsidy. We can't ignore those human consequences.
If not for the Victoria lockdown, though, that September quarter would have been upwards of 5%. That's what the RBA is saying next year as well. They're saying 5% growth. The comeback looks like it's on. Do you agree with that?
Well, certainly on paper, the economy's recovering. That's widely expected. Certainly we expected it, and we welcome the fact that growth is returning to the Australian economy. But what matters most is not one or even two growth numbers on a page for a quarter, whether it's September or the December quarter. We want that to be strong. What really matters is what's happening to real people in real communities, and particularly what's happening with their jobs. And the Reserve Bank and others have said that they are still concerned that we'll have higher unemployment for some years. There'll be an issue with underemployment for some time, and we'll have stagnant wages too. And we don't want the government, in their rush to deploy all of these slogans and all of this self-congratulation, to forget that people are not necessarily faring as well as the government thinks they are.
The RBA governor's talking about unemployment being more than 6% in 2 years from now. That's still quite a stubbornly high figure. What needs to be done to get that number down sooner than 2 years?
Well, it relies on a couple of things. It requires some government support for some time. That's the governor's view as well, and the OECD's view. It obviously requires us to continue to limit the spread of the virus and to deploy the vaccine. It hinges a little bit on international developments. It hinges on whether Australians are going to spend these savings that they've accumulated the last 6 or 9 months as well. So there's some uncertainty, and we want the best version of this recovery. But what we're saying is, and the Reserve Bank Governor is saying, the economy is just not one thing. It's not an abstract thing. What really matters is what's happening to people in communities. That means what matters is what's happening to their jobs and their ability to provide for their loved ones, and that should be our focus.
The JobKeeper payments, part of that mix, obviously saved hundreds of thousands of jobs. Essentially from here, what do you think needs to happen in terms of the tapering and its longevity?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's a very, very good thing that JobKeeper has saved hundreds of thousands of jobs. That is precisely why we proposed it in the first place. That's why we welcomed it when the government had a change of heart and came to our view on the JobKeeper subsidy. That's a good thing. We need to make sure we're not in a rush to withdraw that support out of the economy. Not just Labor's view, but the OECD and the Reserve Bank and others have said, be careful about how you withdraw this support. We know that JobKeeper won't be a permanent feature of the economy or the budget forever, but we need to be careful about how it's tapered so that we don't cruel the recovery as it's gathering pace.
So you don't want it to end in March, basically?
Well, it needs to be responsive to the economic conditions. And if the government says in February or March that all of these problems in the labour market have suddenly disappeared and we don't need JobKeeper anymore, then that would be one thing. But most people expect there's still going to be substantial weakness in the labour market. That means don't be in a rush. In their rush to declare victory at half-time over this economic crisis, they shouldn't be in a rush to pull that support out.
It was a lot of support overall, about $200 billion. As you said, it was Labor's idea, so you can't really be critical of JobKeeper. Has Scott Morrison really not left you much room to move?
Well, I don't accept...
In terms of Labor criticism.
Well, there have been aspects of JobKeeper that we would have done differently. They excluded people deliberately. Those workers have been left behind. They're unemployed. There have been issues with some of this money going to fund executive bonuses for companies that are going quite well. So there are some issues. But in the main, in principle, we have said for some time, before the government, that wage subsidies were a good idea. We're pleased to see wage subsidies save some jobs. But the issue here is what happens next. The government says we've got these hiring credits, And we point out, as many in the community are pointing out, that they exclude workers who are over 35 years of age and leave those people behind. So there are always issues where we think the government can do better in supporting workers in the economy.
The issue that Labor raised and targeted during question time about individuals accessing their super early, there's $36 billion accessed via the superannuation, early access that is.
Yeah.
The problem that Labor raised was that then that goes into the liquid assets test for people who lose their job. So if you've taken your 20 grand out, in the event that you lose your job, you want a buffer, you don't get the dole then because you've got that liquid asset.
Precisely.
So should that money be quarantined away from the liquid assets test?
Well, first of all, we didn't support early access in the first place because it's a raid on retirement incomes and people will pay a hefty price at retirement for the government encouraging them to take money out of their super. So that's the first issue. But the issue we did raise in question time today, Anthony Albanese and Bill Shorten and Linda Burney and others have been raising this through the course of today, which is if the government encourages you to take this super money out, it can then disqualify you from receiving unemployment benefits because of that liquid asset weighting test period. And as Linda Burney said eloquently today and in our questions, why are they encouraging people to take money out and then it disqualifies them from the support that they need and deserve? It could disqualify them from receiving something like $10,600 in payments that people desperately need when they're at their most
So would you like to see that quarantined from the liquid assets test? Well, so if you've got your 20 grand from super, that should not be factored in.
Well, I mean, clearly,
is there a way to do that?
Well, we moved amendments yesterday in the Parliament. We pointed this out to the government yesterday, so it wasn't a new issue today. In the Parliament, Linda and Anthony and others, we tried to amend the legislation so that there wasn't this change to the liquid asset weighting test period, which goes to this specific issue that we're raising now. The fact that the government is persevering, now that they know the impact of it, I think speaks very ill of them.
Did the government get the response right this week when it comes to China? The OECD has said that our outlook is stronger, but two of the big issues weighing down on that outlook, one of them is insolvencies locally, the other is the relationship with China.
Yeah.
Did the government get its response right this week?
Well, firstly, I agree with the OECD. It is one of the big uncertainties. Nobody is pretending that the relationship isn't currently at a low ebb, and that has consequences for our exporters and for our employers. We said at the time, in relation to that tweet, that it was inappropriate, it was appalling, it was disgraceful. There are broader issues here in the relationship that go beyond that one tweet. And as I said, I spend a lot of time with exporters, employers, their peak groups, and they are very anxious and very concerned. There is not an absence of agreement that we have a problem here. There is an absence of leadership from the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister when it comes to this, and there's an absence of a plan to deal with it. Now that we know that this mess has been created of the relationship, whoever you want to blame for it, the issue here is what we do about it. I haven't heard a plan from the Prime Minister. Our inclination is to support any good plan that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister come forward with. They haven't come forward with something we can engage with.
We're seeing wine-targeted barley. Now the coal miner Peabody pausing its Metro mine in the Illawarra. The union says that the hold-up at this, by China, some 80 ships off the coast of China with coal on board, seaborne coal exports, that's part of the mix. So is it starting to hit the resources sector as well, this row?
I mean, certainly the resources sector is concerned about the status of the relationship as it stands. I haven't yet spoken to the company or the union about the specific reasons for the steps that they've taken. But clearly, in that industry, in agriculture, in other parts of the Australian economy, and in some cases some quite big employers, are really concerned and really anxious for good reason. And what I think the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister owe those employers and those exporters is a plan for how we're going to move forward now. If the government comes forward with a good plan and it's worthy of bipartisanship, then well provide it.
That tweet you mentioned, it was ridiculous in so many ways, but a mid-ranking official elicits an emotional response from the Prime Minister. Is it the Prime Minister who should have responded to that in the way that he did, or do you leave it to someone else to have a crack?
Well, the way I see it, Kieran, is it's happened. I don't think it's especially fruitful for us to kind of second-guess that. The tweet was appalling. It was disgraceful. It wasn't the actions of responsible player on the world stage. I think that is agreed. We can argue about the Prime Minister's language. What's more important than any of that is that our exporters, our employers and our country more broadly get a sense from the Prime Minister how is he going to provide the necessary leadership to improve this relationship.
Just finally, before I let you go, people talk about you as a future leader, you know, around this place. How do you see it at the moment? I mean, Anthony Albanese polling not so well.
Oh,
What's your view on it? Would you step up if needed?
No, Anthony Albanese will take us to the election. I support him completely. I think that he has struck the right balance all year between being constructive and being critical. We take collective responsibility in the Labor Party for how we're performing. That's how it has always been. That's how it should be.
So for you, it would be beyond the next election, if anything?
My aspiration is to be the Treasurer in an Anthony Albanese government.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Jim Chalmers, talk to you soon.